Welcome to Politics Not Included, where we get to know the person, not their policy. We're creating a space to have real conversations with your elected officials and election candidates to get to know them as a person first. We're hoping these conversations will make it easier to approach and engage your local leadership. Now, before we get started with today's episode, I have a couple of ground rules to cover as always. The first is, Politics Not Included is hosted by the Transparent Campaign Initiative. And in the spirit of transparency, these episodes will be published without being edited. And we're doing this to keep this platform neutral and authentic to all of the guests that we have on the show. Now, what that means for you as a listener or a viewer if you're on our YouTube channel is that you may witness or hear longer pauses than anticipated or some bloopers or stumbling over words. And that's because you're watching or listening to this conversation as if it were live. You're hearing the whole thing in its entirety. And I'm excited to get to share these conversations with you in a true and authentic form. And that leads me to rule number 2, that as you're watching or listening to this, if you have any comments that creep up in your head that if you were sitting in this room with us, you may not have the confidence to say to our face, or you may not feel like the best human being if you did, I'm going to ask you to keep that in your head and out of the comments. And that's because we're just trying to have conversations to get to strengthen our community and to build each other up rather than tear each other down. And in order to do that, I think we need to keep the comments kind. Now that all of that is out of the way, let's get this show started. On today's episode, we're welcoming Jayme Morris-Hardeman. Jayme is the Executive Director of Thrive, which is a nonprofit in Manhattan, Kansas, dedicated to reducing poverty by building skills and relationships that strengthen families and individuals. She's also a member of the USD 383 School Board currently and is seeking re-election this November. Jayme, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to have you join us today, and I'm really excited to get into some of your background. So as I was doing research for this episode, you have a very interesting career path and where you started and how you got to today. So I kind of want to break it down.
Okay.
Take us back to the beginning, and then we'll kind of walk through where you started and how you got to where you are today.
Okay.
So you have a bachelor's and master's in biochemistry and molecular biology.
Yes.
And after that, you started volunteering for a nonprofit. Why molecular biology and biochemistry? And then how did you make that jump from that to volunteering?
Yeah, it's not the traditional career path, that's for sure. So I came to K-State to study chemistry originally. I wanted to be a forensic chemist. I was obsessed with true crime and thought that it would be fun to work in a crime lab. And so started with chemistry as my major. But as I got into my classes, I figured out what I'm really interested in is how bodies work, what's happening on the molecular level, how do brains function, all of those pieces. And so that led me into biochemistry and biology as my undergrad. And then I worked with David Grigger in animal science. He had a molecular biology lab. And so I was running his lab and got my master's degree with him in animal sciences, although it focused completely on molecular biology. He did make me feed a cow. I had to go out and feed a baby cow. He said I couldn't get my degree unless I did that. So that was okay. I was okay with that. And I loved science and I loved the research I was doing intellectually, but I wanted to make more of a difference in the world. And so I had worked as a legal secretary in high school. I thought I wanted to be a lawyer. And so working for a group of 6 attorneys while I was in high school, learned very quickly that that was not the field I wanted to be in. And so I had worked with quite a few attorneys who did child need of care work. And because of that, I was familiar with the CASA program. And so court-appointed special advocates are volunteers who are assigned to one child or one family of children at a time. And it's the volunteer's job to advocate for the best interests of those kids, which means really getting to know those kids, advocating for them in the court system, but also in the educational system and the mental health system and every system. Just name a system and that's what you're doing. And so I knew what CASA was. And just one Sunday I happened to open the newspaper and I never looked at the help wanted ads, and there was an ad there to come work at CASA here in Manhattan. And I thought, okay, I want to do this. This is where I want to make my difference. I want to advocate for kids. And so applied for the job at CASA and wrote them this 3-page cover letter that said, here's all my transferable skills. And even though I have no background in this, you should hire me anyway. Yes. And they did. And so 27 years ago, I went to work at CASA. I loved what I did there. I was the executive director of that organization for 13 years. And then I left to form Thrive. And so Thrive is based on the principles of the issues we saw consistently in the families we served at CASA. So if you looked universally, what brings families into the foster care system? Financial poverty. And that doesn't mean abuse and neglect only happens there, but those are the families who end up in the system. Lack of support system for the parents and lack of parenting skills, which is often that they grew up in foster care themselves or with parents who didn't know how to parent. And so Thrive addresses those. It's meant to be prevention. It's meant to strengthen families in a way that they don't end up with their kids in the foster care system, or if their kids are in the system, that we can help them get home successfully. And so I've been with Thrive now for 10 years. Love the work there, love the chance to really delve in deep with families. We're working more now with teenagers, and that's really exciting to me because I think the earlier we can intervene, the more likely it is that we can make a lifetime change for people. And so while we're still working with adults and with families, teenagers have become our new focus, and that's really exciting.
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack.
Sorry.
Great.
It's a whole lot.
Yes. So in the CASA program, are you working with one child at a time, and are you working for them just for a month, or are you working with them for a year? What did that experience look like?
Yeah, so I will be a CASA volunteer until I die. That is something that's incredibly important to me. My older son was my CASA child, so I was his advocate from the time he was 6 until he was 9.5. And then he went to live with his dad in Wichita, and that fell apart. And so he came to live with us when he was 11. He's now 31. So, you know, I had that experience, but his case was fairly typical in that I was his advocate for 3.5 years. You know, I tend to get the cases that are more difficult, so I tend to serve children for longer periods of time. I've served a lot of kids who've aged out of foster care, and that's kind of become my specialty. But you work with one family at a time. So like my current case right now, I'm sharing with Lisa Sisley, and she and I have 2 teenagers we're working with who now are both 17. One just had a birthday. The other one will be 18 next month. So, you know, older youth who are going to age out of foster care. And that's just, for me, somewhere where I feel like I can have a huge impact long term of helping them to access the systems that are available to them after foster care, make sure they get the benefits that they deserve, but also make sure they don't have horrible outcomes, right? They need a support system, and CASA becomes that for those kids. So we do serve kids birth to 18. I don't like to work with infants. I think that's scary as a CASA, just because it's a very different experience. Working with teenagers, they can tell you what they need. Infants is a whole different ballgame. So I tend to take older kids, but I've served kids all the way from newborn right out of the hospital to kids that are in their 20s that have stayed in the foster care system beyond 18. So it's the whole gamut. Longest case I ever served was 5 years. A girl I served from the time she was 13 until she aged out at 18. And the shortest case I ever had, I think, was 6 months.
Wow, okay. Yeah, quite the range.
So it's long term. I mean, most volunteers, I'd say the average is probably 16 to 18 months for a case. And it is intense volunteer work, but it's not overwhelming. There's great support from staff. So the CASA program's run by, you know, a core group of staff members who provide training. So I still volunteer with the training component of the CASA program. They provide long-term support. They provide continuing training. So it's not something that you're on your own doing, and it's nice when you can share a case with a friend. So doing this with Lisa, she's a brand new volunteer, and so being able to give her some advice as a seasoned volunteer has been really fun to share.
Yeah. And did you, and you don't have to answer this if you don't want to, but did you end up adopting your oldest son?
Yes, yeah. So Trenton's adoption was finalized when he was 13.
Wow, that's amazing. That's a great story, and getting to know him.
And I always have to put the caveat on there, you're not supposed to adopt, you're not supposed to take your kids home, you're not supposed to adopt your kids, right? I was not his CASA at the time he came to live with us, so I feel like I always have to put that caveat out there. But he will always be my CASA kid, and he's the reason I'll always volunteer. I'd been his volunteer for about 2 years, and he and I were in the car, and he told me one time, he said, "I hate the judge." And I said, "Why is that?" And he said, "He makes all these decisions about me. He doesn't even know me." So this is from an 8-year-old, right?
Yeah.
And I said, "He does know you because that's my job. I tell him who you are, right? I paint a picture of who you are." And he looked at me and he said, "You're the only person I trust." And I thought, oh my God, I will be a CASA volunteer forever. The fact that here's this volunteer who shows up once a week and hangs out with this kid for an hour, and I'm the person you trust, I was like, okay, this is it. This is where you can really make an impact on a kid's life.
Yeah, that's a really special connection, especially if they don't have anybody else to turn to.
Right.
You can't imagine the impact that makes in their life.
So it's amazing volunteer work. I can't encourage people enough to think about being a CASA, if nothing else, that comes out of this interview for you. Be a CASA volunteer. It's amazing.
Yeah. Great advice. And then when you moved into the executive director role, were you then managing the entire program, or?
Yeah, and at CASA we added other programs under our umbrella. So during the time that I was there, we added a child exchange and visitation center where parents could see their kids in a safe setting. We added a child advocacy center, which I still think of as new, but I wrote that grant and formed the team for that in 2007, so it was a million years ago. And CACs are built to provide services for kids who've been victims of crimes, particularly sexual abuse. And so there's advocacy services, there's a multidisciplinary team that wraps around those kids, and those programs still exist under the umbrella of Sunflower Children's Collective along with CASA.
Okay. And while you were the executive director, is that when you took your first plunge into running for public office?
Yes it is.
So you were a Manhattan City Commissioner for 6 years, right?
For 4 years.
Okay. What made you want to make that jump and run for a city commission with everything else you had going on at that time?
So my husband and I have a house in an older neighborhood near campus. And what really got me involved in city politics to start with was we were trying to get our neighborhood downzoned. So our neighborhood was zoned R2, which meant that houses that had been single family houses were being turned into duplexes by landlords who could bring in income from 8 students. And you couldn't compete as a family to buy a house if a landlord could get that kind of revenue. And so we worked with the city to downzone, which meant we had to go to city commission, we had to speak in front of the commission. There was just lots of neighborhood kind of issues that got me drawn into the idea of running, and social services. The fact that we have this social service safety net in Manhattan, I wanted to strengthen that. And so when I first ran in 2005, I was a baby. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know how to run a campaign, right? I mean, the whole thing was like this whole new world for me. It's like, what am I doing here? But I'm so glad that I did. I learned so much when I was on the city commission. I learned about issues that I never would have thought would have been in front of us that have to do with zoning and city planning, right? I mean, you know those things are out there, but it's not something that's on your everyday radar screen. Downtown redevelopment happened while I was on city commission. So the first 2 years I was on commission, 2005 to 2007, was the north end of downtown redevelopment. And then I was off city commission for 2 years between 2007 and 2009, and then reelected in 2009. So that 2009 to 2011 period is when we worked on the south end of downtown redevelopment. And that whole project was designed to strengthen Points. So Points was struggling at the time. We didn't have a core downtown that was functioning the way it should. And the idea was if we could buffer it with these areas on the north and south ends, it would strengthen Points and keep us having a core, strong downtown. And I think that's worked. I mean, I feel so proud when I drive past like the Discovery Center and think I voted for that. You know, I mean, that's pretty amazing to think. So my time off commission was definitely an interesting time in my life. I had a 2-year seat the first time on commission. So when I had to run again in 2007, I knocked on over 2,000 doors. I mean, I basically took months off work to just campaign. And I lost in a tie. So in Kansas, if you tie in an election, it's a coin toss that decides it. So Jim Sherrow and I tied for this seat. I called tails, it was heads, and I lost my seat on the city commission. So I think that the story I always tell with that is every vote matters. One more vote would have kept me on the commission that year, and I'm glad it didn't. Looking back in hindsight, that's when I had my baby. And so at that point, Trenton was 14, gave birth to Caden. It worked out great during that time. And then I went back in 2009 and got to serve 2 more years, and it was amazing. But it was definitely frustrating to me that a coin toss decides an election.
Yeah, so it sounds like it worked out for the best, but it's crazy.
Not at the time.
Yeah, that's a hard pill to swallow, and I'm sure you'll remember that tails forever. You remember?
I never call tails. If anybody asks me for a coin toss now, I call heads because I will never call tails. And I know probability. I understand the math, but I will never call tails again.
Yeah, this is why you have to vote. You hear stories of a coin toss happening or one vote.
Yeah.
swinging between the two, but to actually talk to somebody.
Right, it actually impacted me. Correct, it impacted me. And so it worked out fine because Jim Schroe and I had the same positions, and then he ended up getting reelected again in 2009. And so we served together on the commission, and it was fine, it was lovely. But it was just so frustrating to me to think how few people vote in local elections. And it was clear to me from my first election, you start pulling into the data, and if you're lucky, 20% of registered voters are voting in these elections.
Yes.
Nothing impacts your life more than local politics. So whether that's city commission, county commission, or school board, the decisions being made there are impacting you every single day. Yet people don't engage with those elections.
Yes.
And so I'm so glad to have opportunities like this to talk about why your vote matters. Be educated, go vote. So for city commission and school board both, there's 3 seats open. You can vote for 3 people. Figure out which 3 people you like and vote for them, right? But make sure you go vote. It's so crucial.
Yeah, this is going to be a highlight clip later. So we're going to see if we can get this to circulate.
Gosh, well, it's just, it's so frustrating to me when you start to talk to people. So as I started to delve into that 2007 election and who didn't vote that I knew. So people would come up to me all the time and they're like, I was going to vote for you, but I forgot to go vote. I'm like, don't tell me that.
It's better to not
You
know.
make me want to punch you in the face, right? Don't tell me that. So, but how many people came up to me and said that? And I'm just like, don't you know how crucial these elections are? Not just for my seat. I mean, I didn't care about that nearly as much as I care about the fact that what happens in our community is decided by a very small margin of voters.
Yeah, I think that people know generally it's happening, but
Right.
don't know enough to take that step to get involved or understand. Yeah.
And back then, there were April elections. So
That's
it was
completely
weird
different,
timing,
yeah.
and people just didn't pay attention to it. At least now in November, people kind of expect I'm going to vote in November.
Yes.
So that makes it slightly easier. But even so, people just don't pay attention in the same way they do to national races. And yes, those impact your life, but so does what's happening locally. Mm-hmm. So if I could just convince everybody I know in the whole world to go vote in local elections, I would feel like I've done my job.
Yes. In 2023, it was about 20%.
It always is.
Well.
It
So
always
it
is.
seems like there's a general population that is
Yeah.
people that go and vote every year, and then nobody else is adding to the pot. So
No,
we've got to change that.
they're not. And that's something I've tried to work on is just encouraging people, college students in particular. If you're living here for 4 years, registering to vote at home doesn't make nearly as much sense as it does here. Decisions that are made by the city commission about rental inspection, about property tax, all of those things impact you as a college student. Mm-hmm. Why would you not choose to vote here?
Yes.
You know, so that to me has been a sticking point for years of just how do we get people to register here?
Yes, and get some more people involved.
Right.
Most of of that 20%, the majority of that is over the age of, I believe, 45.
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
And so the people that will live here the longest, hopefully, if you stay in Manhattan, you should be voting in these things.
Yes, it matters.
It's continue to impact your life.
Well, think about downtown redevelopment. I mean, those are decisions we made 20 years ago that are still impacting the community today. We could have made different decisions with that. That would impact you.
Yeah,
So
that's a great example because everybody has things to say about downtown and those types of things, and those decisions are made a long time ago. And government is slow.
Move slow. So slowly.
You got to get involved when you can.
That's right. Every vote matters.
So with that campaign, it was your first time campaigning. You just decided to do it. What was the steepest learning curve that you felt like you had to face with campaigning for the first time?
What is so interesting to me about campaigning, I love data. I'm a data person. I guess that's because I'm a scientist, right? I mean, I love data. And so as I started to dig into the data, it was trying to figure out how to get disengaged people to vote. So that election, I really focused on young people. I was teaching biochemistry at K-State at the time. I was advising at my sorority. And so I had a lot of connections with college students. And so I worked really hard with groups of college students to get them registered here. And the number of people in that 18 to 24 age range that voted in that election was 1,000 more than in the previous election in 2003. And so I'm pretty sure those are my votes, right? If I have to say, why did I get elected that first time? I think that was it. Mm-hmm. It was encouraging people in that younger age group to engage in this election. that was understanding how to do that was hard, right? Who are those people? Where do you find the data about who voters are? You know, now there's databases that make it so much easier, but back then you bought a voter list from the county clerk's office, and I spent hours, and my husband always says this, your little green chair. I had this little green chair, and I sat there with my laptop, and I was just pouring through Excel spreadsheets, trying to figure out who to target to get them to go vote. And so, you know, that piece was hard. It was hard to figure out how to engage voters, and it still is. That's still the challenge.
Yeah, definitely. That is kind of cool that you can see that spike in.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
I really thought, okay, so I worked hard on that. Like, I engaged everybody I could at K-State, all my friends who were teaching at K-State, all my people who had connections at K-State, and I'm like, convince college students that their vote matters in this election. And back then, the big issue was rental inspection. We really wanted a rental inspection program, and a lot of college students felt really strongly about that. And so when you could go and say, I support rental inspection, and they would see that as something that would benefit their lives, you could get them to engage.
Yeah. Yeah, very interesting to hear that start of it. And then in a little bit, we'll kind of circle back to your campaign now and how your experience may have changed. But before we depart this era of your life.
20 years ago, which is really scary.
You were on Within Reason with Mike Matson not too long ago talking about some of the science behind child abuse and attachment, and it was really interesting to hear you explain that, so I would recommend people to go listen to that too. You had mentioned that you made the transition between CASA and the Sunflower CASA project to Thrive because you wanted to do something that was less reactive and more intervention-based. So can you tell us a little bit about how you made that jump and why Thrive was the right fit? You touched on it a little bit. But.
Yeah, so in 2015, Patrick McLaughlin, who was a pastor at the First United Methodist Church, brought Circles USA to Manhattan. So Circles is a nationwide program that existed to help bring families out of poverty. And that was the basis. And he asked me, he's like, would you come help facilitate the first training class? And I was like, yes, because I'd been reading about Circles, and everything about it said to me, this can help families get out of poverty. This can help families strengthen as families. This can help people prevent child abuse. And I'm like, okay, this has a real interest to me. So I went and helped facilitate that first training class. And then I started working there and decided that what we were doing with Circles USA was not functional in this community. So their curriculum that they provided, I didn't feel was addressing the needs of the population here. They charged us $15,000 a year to be a member. Wow. So compare that to National CASA that was like $500 at the time, right? Yeah, and they weren't giving us a whole lot for that. And they were very focused on the low-hanging fruit. They said that all the time. They wanted families who were almost at the federal poverty line, that it would only take just a tiny little bit to bump them up and be able to say, we got these people out of poverty. Well, that's not addressing, right? It's all about numbers. And I'm like, no, this is about people. This is not numbers. And so we broke away. We were the first program in Kansas to say, we're done with Circles. We're going to do our own independent function. And so Thrive was born from that. And Elaine Johannes and I were the ones who were really pushing hard for us to move away. So Elaine's a professor at K-State in Extension and in human sciences. And so she and I were like, this is it. We cannot continue to function in this model. We want to do our own thing. And so that's where Thrive came from. And we really have grown it and changed it over time. But the idea behind it was people need support systems. You can't function in a vacuum. So Bruce Perry is one of my favorite scientists. Bruce Perry is an MD, PhD child traumatologist who has spent his whole career working on child trauma. He wrote a book a couple years ago with Oprah Winfrey called What Happened to You? And it's about trauma and resilience. And I think every human needs to read this book. So I have a list of 5 books every human should read, and that's one of them. So if you haven't read it yet, go read that book. It is incredible the work that he's done about brains and what trauma does to brain development and how that impacts our whole bodies. And so his work is just really instrumental to me. And the fact that he talks about that we're in relational poverty as a society. Right? Poverty doesn't just mean financial. Poverty can also be lack of a resource. And in his case, he talks about how kids were meant to grow up in a system where one child had 4 adults. If you think about our traditional families, where you lived in a family group or a village or a group where there were lots of adults for every kid. Now, if you're lucky, it's 4 kids to every 1 adult. And that's not functional. That's not functional for child development. It's not functional for the way we operate as parents. We need that support. And so that's what Thrive was really designed to do. When we started to, make a program for ourselves, for our own community, that we thought was going to address the needs, that's what we focused on, was how do we build support systems for people? I don't want anyone who's at Thrive to ever say, I don't have anybody to call if I'm in an emergency, right? I mean, my list of people I could call if I broke down on the side of the road is extensive. I don't want anybody to say, I have nobody. I have nobody to call. How do you parent? How do you function in society without people around you? Yes. You don't. Our brains are designed for relationship. That is everything. And so that to me is a huge component of Thrive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, having people around you that can support you, no matter how big or small,
yes,
it's huge. It's big for getting you through your life. It's also big for
yes.
just the way that you feel. Like you're talking about,
you have to.
Industry. Having people around you that can support you is huge. So that's great that
it is. So Bruce Perry talks a lot about regulate, relate, reason. And if you want to get to reason, which means learning, so this is a huge application to our classrooms, you have to feel safe and be regulated, meaning you have to be calm. You have to have your brain in a state that it's willing to accept new information. You have to be in a relationship with someone, and then you can get to learning. Mm-hmm. And that's important to us at Thrive, that a safe place, a place where you feel not judged, a place where you feel like you're loved, a place where you feel like you're in a relationship with people, and then you can get to learning new skills. But it takes a while to build those first two, and that's the same in our classrooms. Mm-hmm. We need teachers who are focused on those first two. We need kids to learn how to do algebra, right? But they can't do that until we do those first two. If their basic needs aren't met, and that includes their need for food. Food insecurity is a huge issue for our school district. Housing, we have a number of homeless students in our school district. Yeah, all those pieces, if they're not there, you never get to learning. And that's what Thrive's based on.
Yeah, and that makes sense if you just think about going through your day stressed out about something.
Right.
You can't focus on anything else.
No.
So if you don't have those basic fundamental pieces there, I couldn't imagine trying to learn something new or go into a classroom where it may feel scary or intimidating without having that solid foundation.
Right.
So that's a really...
Yeah, just to me, when I think about why I decided to run for school board 4 years ago now, which again, that's crazy, that's been 4 years, that was a huge piece of it. Was I saw that there are a lot of kids whose basic needs are not being met in this community, and I wanted to be sure that our school district was addressing that population, right? That we're looking at kids and saying, what are we doing to meet their basic needs? Are we providing the tools that the teachers need to be able to do those things? And that has been one of the incredible pieces of serving on school board, is getting to really interact with those students and teachers and say, how do we better support them? What can we do to make sure these kids have the resources they need to effectively get to learning?
Was that the main reason that you decided to run, or were there other things too?
Two reasons. That one, and then Carla Hagemeister is on the school board right now. The first time she ran in 2017, she asked me to be her treasurer for her campaign. And I said yes. So then she and I ran together in 2021, but that started as, will you be my treasurer again? And I was like, sure, I'll be your treasurer again. And about a week later, she called me and she said, no, I don't want you to be my treasurer. I want you to run. And I was like, I don't want to run for another office, right? I loved my time on city commission. I learned a ton. I wasn't at a place in my life. I mean, it was right after the pandemic, right? We were still in the pandemic at that point, honestly. Yes. I'm like, I'm not sure I'm ready to do this again. And Carla's like, oh, come on, do it with me. Mm-hmm. And so that was a big impetus as well, was Carla twisting my arm to join her in campaigning, which I'm so glad I did. And now she's my treasurer this time around. So we get to flop that position, which is perfect.
Yeah, you guys are on opposite 2-year cycles, right? So as a treasurer, this is a little spinoff here. What do you do as a treasurer? Are you just managing or
not much for school board. It's more for city commission. City commission has to do reports regularly. So you've seen already there was a finance report that came out about the city commission. How much have people raised? How are they spending their funds? With school board, you only have to report 30 days after the election. But as treasurer, you're keeping track of what income's coming in, what expenses are you having going out. Okay. So it's a pretty minor role. Mostly it's putting your name on people's things.
Yeah, but you're still associated with it.
Yes.
Those types of things.
Yeah.
So that's a really cool backstory there on the two of them.
Nice of Carla to twist my arm into doing that. And I'm glad she did. I've loved my time on school board. Again, I love being in classrooms. I try, and part of that is I have a really flexible job. But I try to spend time every month in classrooms in different buildings, whether I'm reading to kids or volunteering in a classroom. I want to see what's really happening. Mm-hmm. It's one thing to hear behaviors are out of control. But when you're actually in a classroom and there's a teacher trying to read to the class and there's another kid laying on the floor kicking the wall for 20 minutes and screaming while that the class is trying to do this, and there's 3 adults around that kid on the floor kicking and trying to get him to calm down enough they can get him out of the classroom, it puts a different perspective on it.
Yeah, got to collect the data first.
Well, you really do. You really do. And all behavior is communication. And so those kids, that kid on the floor kicking is communicating something. He's communicating his needs aren't being met. And that is huge in our schools. The behavior issues that they've seen, particularly this last year in kindergartners, so the kids who were babies in 2020 have more behaviors than anybody's seen in years. Teachers that are long experienced teachers are saying, I don't know how to handle this in my classroom.
Yeah.
That's important to know as a school board. What can we do to put more supports in those classrooms so teachers don't want to quit?
Yeah, that is interesting to different age groups that went through COVID at different times, how that has impacted their development.
100%.
And ability to learn. It's really interesting. And
it is, and I can't wait to see more data come out about that, but it's universal. If you talk across the country, I talked to friends who are teaching in other cities. Kindergarten this last year was just horrible across the board.
Interesting.
So many behavior issues, so difficult. And part of it, I think, was the pandemic piece, but I think part of it, too, is screens. I have a friend who's a kindergarten teacher at Theodore Roosevelt, and she said kids need a constant dopamine hit. And as a teacher, she cannot provide those kindergartners with a constant dopamine hit that comes from playing on a tablet all day or watching videos, right? We as a society have very much moved to a screen-based childhood, and that's not functional with the way our brains are wired.
Yes. And the tablet or the screen piece is really interesting. I have a 3-year-old, and we limit screen time, but sometimes you have to, like on trips or
100%.
Some mornings it's just like I need to sleep a little bit longer, so please take this for 30 minutes. But those days you can see it in their behavior later. The day that if you give a tablet in the morning or something, I think that behavior follows them for the rest of the day. Versus if you just don't have it around, you're so much more pleasant to be around.
Yeah. There's great research out there about play-based childhood, how important free play is, what we learn from play. So this last year, the school board put a huge focus on the cell phone policy at the high school. Yes. And we did that by having community discussions around the book, The Anxious Generation. I don't agree with everything in that book. He interprets data in ways that I'm not sure are causal versus corollary. Yes. But that being said, the postulation that he makes in that book that play-based childhood has disappeared is 100% correct. And that we as a society need to move back to a play-based childhood. And so we did community conversations. I was really lucky. I got to do 5 out of the 6 community conversations with different parents all over the community. It was amazing. We created a policy with the help of the high school administration and teachers to implement a cell phone ban during class time, because that's how kids can learn best, is if they're not distracted. We had back to school night last night, so that was my last back to school night, which just still makes my heart hurt, but went to Cadence 7 classes last night, and as we went around, every single teacher mentioned how much more engaged their students are now that they're not on their phones. And it was lovely to hear that. And I don't think they were just saying it because I was a school board member in their classroom, right? I mean, I think it was across the board that they're seeing such positive things from that. And we really did make a compromise. Some of the school board members wanted no phones at all. Like, lock your phone up when you come to school and you get it back at the end of school. The compromise we made was you can't have it during instructional time. You can have it in passing periods. You can have it at lunch. And I think that's working beautifully. And so I'm glad that we were able to bring all those people to the table to talk about what do we need. But I think the next step with that is I want to lead community conversations around play. I think we need more play in our classrooms. I think we need parents that better understand play, but we need more play in our classrooms, right? Early learning does a great job at that. But as you get into elementary school, there's less and less play. And, my son always says he wishes in middle school and high school that he still had recess. And, he just needed that time to burn energy and,
use your imagination.
Right.
And play with the sand or whatever.
I know. Even as adults, we need that. And I think we forget how crucial creating or play is for our brains. We all need that.
Yes, it is a nice break. Adult coloring books are a thing.
Well, and again, the science behind that is really strong. I won't do it. I could get really geeky with the science here. But I will say that there are great studies that show that if you look at people's cortisol levels, so you can take that from your saliva and measure your cortisol, which is your stress hormone, that doodling for 20 minutes cut your cortisol in half. And so something as simple as that. Adult coloring is the same thing. It's again, Bruce Perry, rhythmic repetitive motion calms our brain. So that could be walking, swinging, it could be journaling, so the physical act of writing, and coloring. All those things are rhythmic repetitive motion. And that's what helps us do that first step, that regulate piece of regulate, relate, reason. But the science, as you start to dig down all the way to the cellular level, our DNA is actually being impacted by those stress hormones. And you can improve your cellular health by adding things like that into your life.
Yes, very.
I could do a whole hour, 2 hours on that one, but I won't.
Yeah,
if you want to know more, please let me know, and I will be happy to inform you about how that works at the cellular level.
And shifting gears a little bit, you've also founded a nonprofit called True Colors. What is True Colors, and why were you called to add another thing to your plate? You've got all sorts of things that you continue to add.
It's a real issue. I have no boundaries. I'll just say that. I tend to say yes to everything. I've worked really hard on that for the last few years, to say no to some things and not just jump over every idea I have. And I drag Carla into a lot of this. And so Carla always says I'm the gas and she's the brakes. So she helped.
You have to have somebody
I
like
do.
that.
She helps me with True Colors. And so I appreciate that. So the idea behind True Colors, my husband and I own a rental house. We have the house next door to ours. So we live right by a sorority. We have the sorority on one side of us. We had this house next door to us on the other side. And when we moved into our house in '98, that house became a rental that year. And it was horrible. 300 people, parties all the time, people peeing on the side of our house, noise, trash. It was ridiculous. So it came up for sale in 2001. And I told my husband, either we're buying that house and controlling who lives there, or we're moving. And so we bought it. And so we were landlords for a long time, and I hated being a landlord. Everything about it. It was great. My older son, Trenton, lived in that house for 4 years. That was perfect, right? We had vet students there that were great tenants, so it was not a horrible experience, but it's not my favorite experience. And so I told my husband, I said, when Trenton was moving out of the house, I was like, I am so done being a landlord. I want to turn this house into a nonprofit. And he was like, okay. And so I started to brainstorm. What would I do in that space? And at that time, it was 2020. I was serving as the CASA volunteer for a 15-year-old trans youth who had been kicked out of his home because he came out as trans and was in foster care because of that. And I thought, he needs a better support system. He needs to have a place he can go where he can feel safe and be himself and be with other people who are experiencing the same things he is. And so that's where the idea for True Colors came from. And that happened with me putting a post on Facebook about the beginning of 2021, and saying, I think I want to do this. Does anybody want to get on board with me? And that, like, a week later, we had 10 people on a Zoom call talking about how to found this nonprofit. So Carla and I spent a lot of time going around to the high school and the middle school GSAs, the Gender and Sexuality Alliance groups, and talking about, what do you need? If we created an organization like True Colors, although they named it, at that point it didn't even have a name. If we created an organization like this, what would be the core components? And what they said across the board was they wanted a place that they could go and be themselves. They wanted to have access to a gender-affirming clothing closet, which included things like binders for kids who are trans and don't want to present as female. And they wanted access to mental health services. And so all of those things became what True Colors provides. So my husband and I donate the use of the house, and they have their services there. They're expanding now to serve college students since KSU has closed down the Spectrum Center. They'll now be providing days of the week where college students can come hang out at True Colors, which is lovely. I'm so glad that that exists. Yeah. I stepped away from their board about a year ago. I just didn't have the time to be on their board, which makes me sad. I wish I had more time. But I love that program for so many reasons. I love the fact that kids get to have a place that they can feel like they can be their authentic selves. And you don't have to be queer to come to True Colors. Allies are welcome as well. And so a lot of times, because we are located close to the high school, large groups of kids will walk from the high school to True Colors after school, and all different kids that are there who are just seeking a safe place to be themselves. It's so fun to sit out on my back deck and hear them in their backyard. They have a fire pit out there. People will be having lightsaber battles. I feel like that happens a lot. They have, like pool noodles, and they're playing like they're having lightsabers. They're playing, right? And again, that gives them a space to play, and I just think that's so important. So True Colors has struggled financially. It's had its ups and downs. But they seem to be doing really well right now. And I'm really proud of the fact they're stepping up to say, college students need to be served too. This isn't just middle and high school students. We need to serve more than that. Yeah. And good for them.
Yeah, that's beautiful. It's really cool to hear the start of that. You had an idea and you made it come to life.
What I love most about that is my friends responded, right? That's one of those things, every idea I have like that, people are like, oh yeah, let's get on board. And I'm like, thank you friends for being, thank you community for being supportive of things like that.
That support system.
God, it is, it's huge. It's huge. True Colors is amazing. So my younger son is trans, does not use True Colors. It's too loud for him. There's too many people there. I'm like, it's next door. You could go. No, I don't want to go hang out over there. It's too loud.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, but that all happened after we started True Colors, that Caden came out. And so I don't know that he would have felt as comfortable had I not done the work to do True Colors.
So important, especially to have your own kid feel comfortable enough to tell you something like that, to see that you're doing that work and know that you're going to be supportive. That's really beautiful. So you have all of these things, and you said that you've had to start turning some things down, but walk us through now what a normal day for you looks like. How many things are you balancing? And you have the school board on top of it. What does all of that look like?
So Thrive is about 10 to 15 hours a week that I work at Thrive. So very part-time job. I am a CASA volunteer, so I have an active case right now, probably spending 1 to 2 hours a week on that. So that's not a huge amount of time. I'm volunteering at the Fit Closet again, which I'm really excited about. So before the pandemic, I volunteered at the Fit Closet, and then it shut down, of course, during the pandemic. And then I took another full-time job for a while and couldn't volunteer. And now that I'm just back to doing Thrive part-time, I have the time. So on Tuesday afternoons, I go to the Fit Closet for 3 hours and sort clothes. So the Fit Closet is a place for students in our school district who receive free or reduced lunch to be able to come and shop for clothing. They provide school supplies for anybody who is on free or reduced lunch. So 1,100 backpacks of school supplies have been given out. Again, thank you community for being so generous. The donations of clothes to the Fit Closet right now are overwhelming. They've had to pause donations because so many people have given. So I was there yesterday. The number of bins that are just full of trash bags waiting to be sorted for clothes, oh my gosh, it's incredible. So, and the stuff that is donated is always so nice. And so I spent 3 hours yesterday just looking through clothes and putting them on hangers and then putting them out for people to shop. And, you know, I love getting the chance to do that. And then my campaigns take up an awful lot of my time right now. So, yeah, as school board members, we serve on multiple committees. We have 2 schools assigned to us, so it's not quite time yet for that. But I'm assigned to Theodore Roosevelt in the high school, so I'll sit on both of their site councils. I actually served on both those site councils before with Trenton and Caden when they were younger. But that is a cool opportunity to get to be in buildings with that piece. And then multiple committee assignments that we have that take up my time. School board meets twice a month, so it's not a huge amount of time, but I would say it's a regular time commitment. There's a lot of reading that goes along with it. There's a lot of engagement with the community as far as what issues are important to you. You know, you have to be responsive as someone who's serving in local government. If you're going to be a public servant, you have to be able to respond to people. And I think that's an important piece too.
And for your campaign, we're kind of getting into the time period where that stuff is ramping up.
Yeah.
How is this run different than even your last school board versus the Manhattan City Commission? Do you feel like you have a strategy, you kind of have a general game plan, and what is
Yeah, I at least know how to run a campaign. So I do appreciate that it's so interesting. So Dustin Duntz, who was the president of the NEA, the teachers union here in Manhattan, is now their treasurer. Went to a training this summer, multi-day training in another state about running for office. So it was for teachers who someday might want to run for office. And when he got back, I said, let's sit down because I want to hear what you learned. And every piece he talked about, I'm like, yep, I'm doing that. Yep, I'm doing that. Yep. So it was like I learned how to do those things on my own, right? He got to go to a training where they're like, here's the things you need to do if you want to run for office. And I was like, this is awesome. I already know how to do these things. Yeah. So it's a lot of data sorting again. Looking at data of who voted in 2021, who voted in 2023, who voted in 2024 that didn't vote in those municipal elections. Can we pull those people in to vote? Yes. Right? So right now it's creating lists for people to do door hangers. It's creating materials that'll go out in the mail. It's creating social media. So talk about a change. My first campaign, I wasn't on Facebook, right? Yeah. In 2005, it didn't exist. In 2007, I had a Facebook page for my campaign. But how many of my friends were on Facebook at that point? Probably, a handful. Yeah. Versus now, where I feel like social media is such a huge component of campaigning. So that has definitely been a change. Back at the original election, so much of our money went into ads on the radio and the newspaper. I mean, when I raised money, which my first campaign, I spent $8,000 that I raised and spent, which I think is utterly ridiculous, how much money it costs to run a campaign. Yeah. But almost all of that was for radio and newspaper ads, right? Now the ads are so different. It's social media ads now, you know, and it's just a very different scope. My goal for this campaign was to raise $5,000 because I thought that would be enough. The last election in 2021, there was a primary. And so Carla and I worked together on that election, and we raised $10,000 together. And we spent about $5,000 on the primary and $5,000 on the general. And I thought, okay, if I can raise $5,000 for just one election, I feel good about that. I'm over that. And so now the money's being spent, right? Thank God my husband made me save my yard signs. Last time I ran, it was a very hard time to run in 2021. There was a lot of personal attacks happening during that election, which I'd never experienced before. With local elections, it tends to be about issues, right? You know, like I might have been running against someone for city commission who had vastly different positions than I did, but it never became personal. Yeah. It was, I believe this, like rental inspections. I believe in rental inspections. Here's Mark Hadisall, who does not believe in rental inspections. Okay, fine, we can talk about that. Yeah. But the 2021 election was personal attack after personal attack, and that was hard. And I told my husband I will never run again because that was so horrible. And he's like, oh, you'll run again. So he made me keep all my yard signs. So our garage has been full of yard signs for the last 4 years. But now they're there, right? So I don't have to buy as many, which is lovely. So, you know, now it's getting those out. That's a huge piece, is trying to find yard sign locations, because in this election in particular, that alerts people to the fact that there's an election.
Yes.
I think, you know, yard signs to me, it's not going to make someone vote for me because they see a yard sign. But I'm hopeful that they'll see the yard sign and think, oh yeah, there's an election in November. I better be thinking about voting. And so that is a huge priority for me. My goal was 300 yard sign locations. I'm at 230 as of this morning. So we'll see if we hit that 300. But I did have to order more yard signs. So I had to order door hangers, right? I had to put money into postage because there's mailers that we're going to do. And so, you know, those kind of pieces, I think about trying to run a campaign on a statewide or nationwide, you know, scale. I'm very happy with little local elections. I mean, the amount of effort it takes to just figure out what's effective for that is hard enough. I cannot imagine it on a broader scale.
Yeah, with more people.
My gosh. And this, at least, as I look through the voter rolls, I'm like, I know a lot of these people. Right? There's a lot of names on this list that I know already. And so I don't have to convince them to vote for me. I just have to convince them to vote.
Yes.
And that's where I feel like I put most of my effort in this election in particular. Every time I've run city commission and school board, is voter turnout. Get out the vote efforts is everything for this election. I know I have supporters. I know I have people who believe in the positions I'm espousing. But how do I get them to the polls?
Yeah. And now you have been in a public office for 8 years. Mm-hmm. So you've had some experience holding an elected position and running for office several times. What's one thing you wish more people knew about holding an elected position?
It's a great question. With school board in particular, it's a volunteer position. I don't think people realize that. So on the city commission, when I first ran and got elected in 2005, there was a $100 a month stipend to serve on the city commission. Mm-hmm. And it was designed to help you pay for expenses you had because you were on commission. So it could be clothing, it could be childcare, it could be, you know, things that are taking you away from your life. Mm-hmm. It was designed to help cover that. It was not salary, right? I mean, it was a small stipend. By the time I left in 2011, they had increased that to $400 a month. Mm-hmm. And that was a case I made that someone should be able to afford childcare for the time they're spending on city commission. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, you're excluding people from participating. And so that was designed to pay for 40 hours at $10 an hour. Mm-hmm. And I thought, okay, I feel okay about that. But it's still like that. Like city commission pays a small stipend. School board is completely volunteer. And we give our time. And I don't think people realize that. You know, I think you think politicians, oh, they're being paid to do that work. Every one of us is volunteering our time and volunteering a lot of time to make sure we have a quality school system. And we're doing that because we believe in public education. And we believe that an educated populace is important in our country. We believe that you're a good citizen. So our school district's vision is that we create success for every student as a learner, earner, and citizen, right? We're trying to impact all those things. We're trying to impact them as a student now, as an employee later, but also as a citizen. And I don't think you get to that citizen piece without good quality education. Mm-hmm. Education is economic development. If you want to talk about investing in your community, public education is a huge investment in our community and in our future. we're giving our time because we care about that. And so I just think people don't know. They don't know how much effort people put in as volunteers to try to make a difference in this community.
I did not know that the school board
No,
was
most people don't.
until I talked to Kristen Brighton.
Right.
And yeah, I was like, okay, that puts a different perspective on it, that you're not just doing it because of the power or whatever it may be. You're doing it because you care and you believe that you can add something to it, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and that's one of the hardest things for me about campaigning. I could ask you for money all day long for CASA, for Thrive, for True Colors, right? If we were going to sit down together and I said, CASA really needs some money, would you give $100 to CASA? And here's what will happen because of your money. I wouldn't even shake my head at asking that. To ask you to give to my campaign has been so hard for me from the beginning. I always have to think about that in terms of, you're not electing me. This isn't about me as a person. This is about the ideals I'm representing. This is about the vision I have. This is about my core values. And you want to see those things represented on the commission or on the school board. And that's what you're asking people to give to. When you're asking for their vote, I'm asking you to say, I'm going to represent your positions. And you don't always know what the issues are that are going to arise when you serve in those positions. So what I look at with people is their core values. What's important to them? And do they align with my core values? And if they do, then those are the people who are going to get my vote.
Yeah, I was actually talking to somebody a couple of days ago about, you may run on one platform, somebody may care about one thing in particular, but that issue may never come up during your time.
No, it might not. Or there may be some completely off the wall issue that the pandemic. Who would have thought about that? Thank God I was not on the school board during that time. That would have been, Carla still talks about the trauma of having been there. But I feel very fortunate I didn't have to be in those positions and making decisions. Should school be open? Should they not? But again, that's about your core values. No one could have foreseen that.
Yeah, that's an interesting perspective on that. So I have one more question and then we'll shift gears to kind of wrap things up. So in other things that I've looked at with you and you've mentioned books several times here, you seem like an avid reader.
Yes.
If you had to recommend a book that everybody reads, which you already recommended one.
I did. I could give you a whole long list.
What would be a book that you think would be important for people to read?
The book that I think everybody should read is The Power of Showing Up by Drs. Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson. It's a book about attachment. And what I found so interesting about it is, with CASA training, we always talk about the infant attachment cycle, right? As an infant, you have a need. You cry to express that need. So you're hungry, you cry, someone comes and feeds you, you feel better. That cycle repeats a bajillion times, and because of that, you feel secure, right? But attachment's something that happens across our life cycle. You can't be in a relationship with someone without having attachment. And what that book delves into is that to feel secure, you have to be safe, seen, and soothed. So the 4 S's, safe, seen, soothed equals secure. And I think everybody needs to know that. You need to think about that in your life. You need to think about it from the education perspective. Do kids feel safe, seen, and soothed? Are they secure? And then that means that they can get to learning, right? You can't get to learning until you get to secure. So what are we doing to ensure that people feel safe, seen, and soothed? And that, to me, if people would read that book, the way they wrote it is so accessible. Every parent should read it. If you're thinking about having kids, every educator should read it. But honestly, every community member should read it because attachment impacts all of us. So there's my book. But yes, I could also give you a list of about 500 other books I think you should read.
I'll add that one to my own list. I always have a running list, so I'll add that to my list. Okay, now I have 3 questions that I ask everybody at the end of the interview. The first one is, do you remember the first time you voted?
Oh, yes. So, not really voted though, because my mom always took me to vote with her. So when I was teeny tiny, they had the League of Women Voters set up at all the polling stations, little voting machines that kids could vote at while their parents were voting. So I can clearly remember being 4 years old and going with my mom, and it was at the school where I ended up going to school, in the library, and pushing the little voting thing. So yes, I remember that, but I do remember the first time I actually voted. And to me, that's been a priority to vote in every election. That I think using your voice is so crucially important, and I believe that even before I lost in a coin toss.
Yeah. And so that leads me.
But again, that's a parent thing, right? Like my parents always voted, and they took me along. And so from the very beginning, Caden voted for the first time in the 2008 presidential election when he was 6 months old, right? And I have pictures of that. And he'll be 18 in May, and then he'll get to actually go vote, And I'm like, you've been voting your whole life.
Yeah,
so
I've actually taken my son every time we voted too, and we always get a sticker.
Yes, and the sticker part. and the sticker part's
He
huge.
loves the sticker,
Yes.
and we take a picture, so that's pretty fun.
I think that is how you raise voters. You raise voters by taking them to vote with you.
Take the time, it's important.
Like, it's
kinda fun.
huge. So I'm glad you do that. But I also love the stickers. So I don't advance vote that often because you get your sticker then, and then what do you do with it? I want to wear it on election day. So I try to vote on the election day.
Yeah, I've never done an advanced voting all the way. I've always gone in person. I kind of like the experience.
Me too. Me too. Plus, I want my sticker.
Yeah, the sticker, especially for a little kid, the sticker is why.
Oh, it's huge.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you touched on this a little bit, but why is voting important to you?
Oh my gosh. The only way that we as a citizenry can make our voices heard is through voting. And that's not true. There's other ways you can do it, but the most powerful way you can make your voice heard is through voting. And I think that particularly at the local level, if you think about local elections, it's so crucial that we have a say in what's happening in our city, what's happening with our educational system, what's happening with our property taxes, what's happening with our sales taxes. It matters, right? Your engagement shapes this community. And so the voting booth is a place to do that.
Yeah. And then last question, how can people find or connect with you?
So, Facebook, I have a Facebook page for my campaign, Jayme for USD 383. I have a website, which is Jayme for FOR spelled out for USD383.com. You can email me at Jayme Morris-Hardeman, JMorrisHardeman @gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. I'm happy to sit down and talk in person too. You know, I think it's important to hear people's ideas, particularly around education. What can we do to make our schools better? If you've got kids in the system, what are you thinking about the cell phone ban? I shouldn't call it that. It's called the personal electronic policy. I don't know what it's called, but because it's not a ban and the kids are allowed to have their phones in break periods. But, you know, what are you thinking about that as it's coming into being implemented this year? You know, I want to hear from the public. And I think that's one of the things that shocked me the most when I first ran for city commission was if I got 3 emails on a topic, that was a lot of emails. Right? It doesn't take much to engage with your local elected officials because they don't hear from the public. You know, we do budget. We would have this huge budget discussion and no one will come. And I'm like, but yet all you hear from people is taxes are too high. I'm like, are you engaging in this process? I was so happy the city commission did their budget open house recently where people could come and learn about the different entities within the city, the different departments, how that money's being spent. I think that's so important for people to be educated about those things. So I think that it's so important that people engage locally more than any other level of government.
That's great. And I'll wrap us up by saying you can follow us on our social media pages for announcements for new episodes. You can follow us on Instagram at Transparent Campaigns. Our Facebook page is Transparent Campaign Initiative, and you can visit our website, transparentcampaigns.org, to find more information on the USD 383 race that's coming up very soon.
November 4th is the date. Please, please, please remember to vote on November 4th.
And get your sticker.
That's right. You need your sticker.
Well, thanks so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you.